Hello and welcome back to another episode of MacStories Unwind. I'm John Voorhees and I have Federico with me. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We have a little bit of a different episode today. I want to do a little bit of follow-up, a bit of a
Okay.
preview, and a topic out of left field, which I think is not a very Federico topic,
No,
but it is
it's about
a John topic.
sports.
Yeah, it's a sports thing. I guess you could call it a sports thing. But first the follow-up. I neglected to mention this last week, but there was an article in, I think it was Wired, I think. I should look.
Yeah, I think
It
so.
was in Wired about The Devil Wears Prada 2 and about
hmm
the Italian dubbing of that movie, which I guess has been controversial. And it reminded me of our conversation not too many weeks ago about the tradition of dubbing of movies in Italy, and the whole thing stems from exactly that tradition. In that the same actors who did the first movie are dubbing the second movie, but it's been many years since that first movie came out, and as a result, I guess some of the Italian actors are a lot older than they were then, and they sound too old to a lot of people. Is the controversy? What do you think of this?
So, first of all, we went to see the movie in theaters
Okay.
and we didn't really like it.
Oh, that's too bad.
I thought it was a little too heavy handed on trying to modernize itself. In terms of now we're gonna be focusing on HR people now in the workplace, and everybody's gotta behave, and there are certain words that you're not supposed to use anymore, and like it was really heavy handed on that, and as a result, they turned Miranda into like. Part of the appeal, I mean, it's right there in the name of the movie. She was like the devil in the first one. She
Right.
was mean and she I mean, obviously she was like abusive in a way by early 2000 standards, and but that was also part of the appeal, and the whole thing uh, was that the main protagonist, she wanted to prove herself to Miranda, despite Miranda being so cold and distant and only
Right.
about the work. And in the new one, she got soft, and she's not, she smiles too much, she
Mm.
laughs too much, and she hangs her own coat, like all these things that they're so un-Miranda like.
Yeah,
Um,
it sounds like it got rid of the tension that was in the first
the
one.
tension, because they wanted to be so politically correct. And I mean,
Yeah.
we are surrounded by HR people and having to be rightfully so in many circumstances politically correct. But I think any form of art like movies or video games are a form of escapism and a form of imagining things that could not happen in real life, and that was not the case with the second movie.
Right.
Also, the ending was like but we noticed the worse Italian voice acting immediately.
Mm.
At first, we thought that they changed the actors doing the voiceover, but no, they were actually just older, and it was even more of a stark difference because we had just seen the first movie the night before,
Oh,
which was
sure.
probably a bad idea
Yeah.
because that gave us an immediate, fresh point of comparison.
Yeah.
And that made watching the second one actually worse because we were coming from the first one not even 24 hours earlier.
Mm.
So, and on top of that, it's not just the voices being different. I thought the Italian dubbing was actually worse. The translation was worse. And Silvia was like, "Didn't you tell me that we have a long history of Italian voice actors and Italian dubbing being superior to other countries?" And I felt so silly because I was like, "Yeah, historically we do, but this one is really bad."
Yeah.
There were some English expressions that were translated literally, and it just felt like a rush job for the Italian translation that didn't really apply to to how people would speak in a modern Italian office setting.
Right.
It was weird in a whole bunch of different ways. And the first movie is better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's too bad to hear, but yeah, it's very relevant to our conversation a few weeks ago. I did want to preview something, Federico, is that
Okay.
this weekend I'm going to the Cheerwine Festival.
To
And
the what?
I'm going to the Cheerwine
Ah,
Festival.
yes.
And I think we've talked about Cheerwine before
Yes,
because
we did.
it's not wine, it's soda. It's
Soda.
kind of kind of that you say soda on the West Coast. On the East Coast, if you're in the Midwest, you might say pop, which is
Pop.
not used that widely. But anyway, Cheerwine is kind of like a cherry flavored soda, and they have an annual festival. It's only in North Carolina, and it's about an hour away. So we're going to go do that for fun, which should be interesting. And I'll report back. I think I talked Chris Lawley into buying some Cheerwine at one point because it feels like a very Chris Lawley adjacent product since he's so into the Dr.
Yeah.
Pepper. I still think about him having us drink that
Oh my
cream soda
God.
Dr. Pepper for breakfast.
Oh my God.
It was like 8 a.m. and we were
I wanted to
drinking.
die. I think a part of me died
I
that
think
day.
so too. It's a good video. Your face was classic.
Yeah.
But for the main topic today, before we do some quick picks, I wanted to talk about this article I read in the Atlantic called "Is It the Shoes?" And "Is It the Shoes" is a callback to a very old Nike commercial from 1990 starring Michael Jordan and
Mm.
Spike Lee. And this was at Michael Jordan's absolute peak in popularity and his shoes popularity. And it's a very funny video that commercial that I'll put in the show notes. But this was not about Michael Jordan or basketball. This is about marathon running and the fact that at the London Marathon this year, a Kenyan broke the world record by going under 2 hours, which at not that long ago was considered to be like physically
Possible. Yeah.
impossible by humans, right? And this is a story by a guy who normally writes for outlets like Runner's World
Hmm.
and Outdoor Magazine and other sports publications about running, and he had predicted that it wouldn't happen if it did until like 2075, and here we are in 2026 and it happened. And the premise of the article is all about whether it's the
Is it the shoe? Is it the
is it the
shoes?
shoes? Because what has happened, I mean, this is like, I've been a runner since I was in high school, and
Mm.
I have been through decades of people saying, oh, these are the shoes that are going to make you faster. Oh, these are the shoes that are going to keep you from being injured. And it's never true. I mean, they may look cool, they may feel great on, they may do the job that they're meant to do, but shoes generally don't make you faster. And
Mm.
running is one of those things where it's probably one of the least technical sports in the sense you don't need a lot of equipment, like
You
per
gotta run.
se. Right, you just run. I
Yeah,
mean, you
you
do
just
need a
run.
pair of decent shoes if you don't want to hurt yourself, but you can do it in just about any athletic shoes. And you don't need a Garmin watch or an Apple Watch or whatever. You just need to go outside and run. And that is starting to change in running because shoes are actually starting to make a difference. And it all started with Nike, who Nike put a ton of money, millions of dollars, into researching new formats of running shoes that use this carbon plate that's sandwiched between very soft layers of foam that have a springboard effect that actually returns more energy
Mm.
as you contact the ground and push off the ground. More energy is preserved in that process than lost in the contact with the ground. And that was the whole theory, and now it's proving out to be true. It started with Nike. This guy who ran the marathon in London, whose name is Sebastian Saw, he was running for Adidas, and Adidas, I think,
Mm.
some of the highest records right now have been done in Adidas shoes, so they may have actually surpassed Nike. But I just find it fascinating because I like these topics that are like adjacent to technology that like we're interested in, but in a totally different realm,
Yeah.
because this is very much a hardware story. It's very much a research story, but it's applied in a very different sense than the kinds of things you and I think about from time to time. And it's accelerated over it's been, I guess, like the last 7 or 8 years where these times have just kind of come down, 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 down to the point where it was kind of inevitable that someone would break 2 hours. And then there's a whole overlay of this story about Kenyan runners have had a history of blood doping. A lot of times, what runners will do is they'll get oxygen. They'll have transfusions of oxygenated blood in order to give themselves more endurance. This person, Sebastian, had been tested something like 25 times leading up to the race because Adidas wanted the world to know that he did it naturally, which was a smart move because he can't be, questioned at this point, which is good. But at the very end of the story, I thought was fascinating was that the other big story from the same weekend as the London Marathon, which is a notoriously fast and a very big event. It's one of the biggest marathons in the world in terms of if you were like, I want to run the biggest marathons in the world, where would you go? You'd do like New York City, you'd do Chicago, you'd do London, you'd probably do Tokyo has a big marathon. I'm sure that Rome has a big marathon too. But there was a 25-year-old guy in Toledo, Ohio, who was completely unknown and ran a marathon in about 2 hours and 5 minutes, in part, they think, because of the shoes. And that was, it's one thing where it's like these elite athletes who are training in their job, they're actually paid to run marathons. This is just a guy off the street who essentially suddenly became the fourth fastest marathoner in American history. Just out of the blue. So I don't know. I just wanted to kind of tell this story a little bit, get your reaction to it. What do you think of this kind of stuff? I know you're not a runner, but
no, but I find it really fascinating, the research that goes into bringing these times down over time, and the sort of the scientific process that goes into optimizing shoes and optimizing the physics of it all.
Right.
I found it to be really fascinating and unexpected, because like on one hand you think, well, it's just about running and it's about endurance and running faster than somebody else, but like, unless we put in a rule that you're supposed to run barefoot as it used to be, millennia ago,
right.
then the only piece of hardware that really matters, I guess, it's like the shoes and the water that you drink. Like, there's nothing else. I mean, maybe weather conditions could also be a factor, but like ultimately it's the runner and it's the shoes and how the shoes hit the ground and the force, how it comes back into the legs and the knees and it's like that's the sort of the closed loop that you have. It's the ground, the shoes, and the runner. That's it.
Yeah, and marathoning's is interesting to me in part too because it's not on like a track like you would in track and field. So you do have the variable of like hills, which is one reason London and like Chicago are very popular, is because they're very flat courses. But you're right. There are only so many variables. I mean, the weather is another one, I suppose, and various physiological things about individuals, like whether they got enough sleep or what they ate the day before, those kind of things. But what I think is kind of interesting too is just that I think that there's kind of this quantized self thing going on here too. I think a lot of people are doing what probably was only done by these elite athletes maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but they're able to do it with things like the Apple Watch or Garmin watches or Whoop bands and all these things, and dial in. They may not be an elite athlete, but kind of dial in their own personal bests in a way that they probably couldn't before by kind of focusing on particular factors and how they impact their own performance, which I think is, that's another angle where I think at some point AI will have some sort of role to play just in crunching all the data. And with that, I do want to preview one other thing, which is I've been wearing running shoes that require firmware updates, Federico.
Incredible.
Okay. These are Avilo running shoes. It was a Kickstarter project by a guy who, during the pandemic, got really into running. He hired a bunch of people who used to work at Nike. He hired, there's a guy who wrote an iOS app called Tempo, Raphael. Do you remember him? He works on this team too, on the software side, and they designed these shoes, which are a little bit of a throwback to the Nikes that used to have those pucks you could put into them in the iPod days. But it's got the firmware built into it. And to update the firmware, if you haven't been wearing the shoes recently, you have to take the shoes and you have to shake them because they need to wake up the Bluetooth device inside of them and
shake to pair.
Shake to pair, because it's like there's a gyroscopic sensor in there or something, and that's how you update the firmware, and it makes all these readings of different aspects of your run. I have not reviewed them yet because it takes quite a while to get enough data for it to really be meaningful. And I'm not so sure it's going to, at the end of the day, be any better than using an app like Gentler Streak or one of these other, running or fitness tracking apps. But it is kind of fun to come home, open up an app, and see my run transferring from my shoes to my phone.
I love it.
So
I love it.
that's my story about running today. And
Okay.
for the record, this guy in Kenya ran the marathon at a pace of 4 minutes 34 seconds, which is phenomenal. I think when I was in high school, I ran like a 4:20 mile. It was my best I ever did. This person did 26 miles in a row. So that's hauling. All right, Federico, I'm going to leave folks with just a really quick pick. We'll have an
Okay.
Unwind Deal too. I want to recommend an EP called Every Good Story by the Triples. This is a female band that has a really great. Whoops!
Let's
Federico,
start playing.
I just hit play as I put my phone down, but
That's how excited you are about
that's how excited I am.
EP.
Look, it's got a great guitar sound, kind of a very John Jangly, female vocal driven band. I went back and listened to some of their older catalog. Wasn't as impressed, but I really like this EP a lot. Just came out about a month ago. They don't have any full length albums, but they do have this EP and a couple of others from a few years ago. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's one of the better finds I've had in the last few months.
Very nice. Thank you.
All right, T-Chief. With that, we're going to end MacStories Unwind for another week. We will be back in another week. In the meantime, you can find us at macstories.net and on social media where Federico is at Fetici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.